They sent the infertile bride to a cowboy as a joke. She came back with a son. Her high cheekbones, flawless skin, and violet eyes were traits admired across the interstellar elite, yet none of it mattered. None of it counted. Because of one word whispered behind closed doors, infertile, her life had become a cruel joke. Maricel's father, Lord Vera, had once been a proud man who believed in the perfection of their lineage. Now, he avoided her gaze, speaking only in clipped sentences and sighs heavy with disappointment. Her mother, Lady Carith, had become cold, a woman whose smiles were reserved for the children of other families. The court whispered constantly. "The bride who cannot bear children," they murmured, as if the words themselves were a punishment. It was during one of these cold evenings, as Maricel sat by a silver-framed window overlooking the sparkling towers of Vera Spire, that her life took a sharp turn. A message arrived on a thin, glimmering hollow scroll. She opened it hesitantly, expecting more court etiquette or another lecture on decorum. Instead, the message was simple. "You are to marry Jerk Thorne of Red Haven. Travel arrangements have been made, effective immediately." Maricel blinked. Jerk Thorne. The name meant nothing to her at first, until a quick search in the archives revealed his reputation. He was a cowboy from the farthest edges of colonized space, living on Red Haven, a lawless frontier planet full of red plains, jagged mountains, and communities that existed far from the control of the elite. And then she realized the truth. Her family was playing a joke. The infertile bride was being sent to a man who lived like a primitive, far from the comforts of their refined world. They expected her humiliation. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Very well," she thought. "If this is their idea of punishment, I will survive it." The next morning, Maricel was escorted to the transport shuttle. The crew consisted of stern, uniformed attendants who avoided her eyes. The journey was long, 12 light-years of travel through silent, cold space, but Maricel found that the emptiness of the universe suited her mood. Here, in the vast silence, she could feel the weight of her family's judgment lessen slightly. When the shuttle finally pierced Red Haven's atmosphere, Maricel was struck by the planet's raw, untamed beauty. The red plains stretched endlessly beneath her, dotted with clusters of hardy buildings and farming domes. Mountains with jagged peaks loomed in the distance, their tops shrouded in swirling clouds. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, harsh, dangerous, yet alive with a rugged kind of charm. Jerk Thorne was waiting for her at the landing site. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and sun-tanned, with dark hair that fell loosely across his forehead. His eyes, a deep shade of amber, were sharp and assessing. Unlike the polished men of the elite, he wore a simple leather jacket and sturdy boots, his hands calloused from years of labor. "You must be Maricel," he said, his voice steady, with a hint of amusement. "I've heard stories." Maricel frowned. "Stories about me." Jerk shrugged. "Everyone's got stories. Yours is interesting, I'll admit." There was no malice in his tone, no judgment, just a plain statement of fact. Maricel didn't know whether to be relieved or irritated. "You'll be staying at my homestead," Jerk continued. "It's a few hours' ride from here. The planet isn't forgiving, so I hope you can keep up." Maricel straightened her posture, summoning the pride she had maintained all her life. "I can handle myself," she said firmly, though a small part of her felt nervous. The elite had sheltered her, provided everything she could ever want, but survival on a frontier planet, that was another matter entirely. The ride to Jerk's homestead was bumpy and long. Red Haven's terrain was wild. Red dust storms that blinded the eyes, rivers that roared with unexpected strength, and rocks sharp enough to tear through a vehicle's hull. Yet, as Maricel looked out at the endless horizon, she felt something stir within her, a flicker of excitement, a tiny spark that the elite had never taught her to feel. When they finally arrived, the homestead looked humble but sturdy. A low building of stone and reinforced metal, Surrounded by grazing animals and small fields of crops, it seemed simple compared to the spires and towers of Vera Spire, but it radiated life and purpose. Jerk led her inside. "You'll have your own room," he said, gesturing to a space that was modest but clean. "Food is simple, but it's good. We survive here by working together. Everyone has a role." Maricel looked around, taking in the warmth of the fire, the smell of cooked meat and fresh bread. She realized that for the first time in years she wasn't surrounded by judgment. Here, she was not a symbol, not a failed bride, not a topic of gossip. She was simply human. The first few days were difficult. Maricel struggled with tasks that required physical labor, from tending animals to hauling water. Her hands, accustomed to silk gloves and ornamental jewelry, were sore and blistered. Her body, used to comfort and ease, ached in ways she had never known. Jerk watched silently, offering advice rather than criticism. "Don't overthink it," he said once, as she stumbled while trying to repair a fence. "Work with your hands, not against them. Nature doesn't care about titles or birthrights." Maricel was frustrated. In her world, intelligence and refinement were prized above all else. She had never believed that physical strength or endurance could matter so much. Yet with every mistake she made, every fall and scrape, she began to understand the value of resilience, of patience, of learning by doing rather than by instruction. One evening, as the twin suns of Red Haven set in blazing streaks of orange and red, Maricel sat outside, watching the plains stretch into the distance. Jerk joined her, handing her a cup of steaming tea. "You're quiet," he said, "thinking about home." "I suppose," Maricel replied. "I used to have a life of comfort, of control. Now everything is unpredictable." Jerk smiled faintly. "That's life. Out here, you either adapt or you fail. The planet doesn't care who you were before you got here." Maricel took a sip of her tea, letting the warmth settle in her chest. For the first time, she felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. She had been sent here as a joke, a humiliation, a punishment. And yet, standing under the open sky, feeling the wind whip across her face, she realized that maybe this place could teach her something the elite never could. The strength to survive, to endure, to become more than the labels others had given her. The nights were long, filled with alien sounds and distant storms. Maricel found herself listening, truly listening, to the rhythm of life on Red Haven. She noticed how Jerk moved with ease through the chaos, how he seemed to belong to the land in a way she never could in the polished halls of Vera Spire. There was a freedom here, a rawness that both terrified and fascinated her. Over the following weeks, she learned to ride, to handle weapons, to navigate the planet's unpredictable weather. She learned to trust her instincts, to observe the land, to anticipate danger. With each new skill, she felt a sense of pride that she had never experienced in her life of privilege. But the most surprising lesson was about people. Jerk, the settlers, even the animals, they all had one thing in common: resilience. They faced hardship every day, and yet they laughed, they celebrated, they helped each other survive. There was no judgment here, no hierarchy of birth or bloodline. Just life, in all its harsh, beautiful reality. Maricel realized, perhaps for the first time, that the joke her family had played on her had been foolish. They had thought to humiliate her, to show her how powerless she was. Yet here on Red Haven, in the middle of dust storms and open plains, she felt more alive than she ever had. More capable, stronger, free. She didn't yet know what the future held. She didn't know whether she would survive, whether she would thrive, or whether the planet would eventually break her. But she understood one thing clearly: she would not be the same Maricel Vera who had left her home. She was no longer a joke. She was a student of life, of survival, of resilience. And in the silence of Red Haven's plains, she felt the first stirrings of hope. Because this was just the beginning. The first weeks on Red Haven had been a whirlwind of challenges for Maricel Vera. Every morning, The red sun rose over endless plains, and with it came the hard reality of life on the frontier. The wind carried grit and dust into every corner, and the distant mountains loomed like silent guardians over a world that demanded respect. Maricel had learned to move with caution, to anticipate the sudden shifts of the land, and to read the signs of the weather. She had stumbled more times than she could count, fallen into shallow rivers, scraped her knees on jagged rocks, and even been chased by a herd of wild thornback beasts. Yet each time, Jerk Thorn had been there, not with ridicule but with guidance. "You're thinking too much," he had said once, after she nearly tipped off her hover cart while trying to navigate a rocky path. "Out here, instinct counts more than elegance. Trust your body." She had hated him for that at first. The words felt like a challenge, a criticism. But as days turned into weeks, she realized he was right. On Red Haven, no one survived by thinking about what they were supposed to do. They survived by doing what was necessary, by being practical, and by learning from failure. The homestead itself was modest but strong. It had been built by Jerk's hands and those of his neighbors, each beam and stone carefully placed to withstand dust storms, predators, and even occasional earthquakes. Inside, it smelled of fresh bread, roasted meat, and the tang of iron from tools and machinery. There were no lavish decorations, no silken curtains or marble floors, only the warmth of fire and the sense of home that came from purpose. Maricel quickly discovered that life on the frontier was not just about survival, it was about cooperation. Every person had a role and every effort mattered. She worked alongside Jerk and his team, helping repair fences, feed animals, and tend the small fields of hardy crops that kept the homestead alive. It was exhausting work, but for the first time, she felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with her family's approval or her social rank. One afternoon, while fixing a broken irrigation pump, she asked Jerk a question that had been on her mind since her arrival. "Why do you stay here?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "Why not move somewhere safer, somewhere civilized?" Jerk paused, leaning on his tool. He looked out across the plains, eyes narrowed against the sun. "Because this is where people learn to be human," he said finally. "Out there," he gestured vaguely towards the distant city spires on a planet orbiting nearby. "Everyone depends on machines, on calculations, on rules. Here, you depend on yourself. You fight for everything. You live with consequences. That's real life." Maricel considered his words. In her world, life had been carefully measured, controlled, and predictable. Failures were rare because everything was planned, calculated, and manipulated. Here, mistakes could be deadly. Yet somehow she felt alive in a way she never had before. The days were long and the work relentless. But Maricel began to notice changes in herself. Her body, once delicate and unused to manual labor, grew stronger. Her hands became calloused, her arms toned, and her muscles learned to move with purpose and precision. Her mind, once confined to etiquette, politics, and decorum, now learned strategy, problem-solving, and survival skills. She realized that life on Red Haven was teaching her lessons no tutor or governess ever could. The other settlers welcomed her gradually. At first, they were wary of the highborn stranger thrust into their midst. But as Maricel proved herself through action rather than words, she earned their respect. She helped repair machinery, learned to hunt, and even managed the small medical station when one of the workers fell ill. Slowly she became part of their community, not a visitor, not a noble, but a participant in the harsh beauty of frontier life. Yet life on Red Haven was never easy. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting the plains in a fiery glow, a warning horn echoed across the settlement. Maricel ran toward the source, heart pounding, to see a scouting team returning from the outskirts, faces pale and tense. "They're here," one of them gasped. "The Screth." Jerk's face hardened. The Screth were a marauding alien species, infamous for their advanced technology and merciless attacks. They had struck settlements across the outer colonies, leaving destruction and death in their wake. Red Haven had so far escaped them, thanks to its remote location, but now the threat had come closer than ever. Marisol felt a shiver run down her spine. Back on Vera Spire, danger had been distant, abstract. Here, it was immediate, tangible. The frontier did not forgive hesitation. Jerk quickly organized the settlers. "We have time, but not much," he said, his voice firm but calm. "We know their patterns. They'll strike at night. We fortify the perimeter, set traps, and prepare defenses. Everyone has a role. Marisol, you'll help with the barricades." Her stomach churned, but she nodded. There was no room for fear. Here, fear could kill you. She threw herself into the work, lifting heavy beams, reinforcing gates, and setting rudimentary alarms. Her body ached, but the determination in her chest burned hotter. That night, as darkness fell, Red Haven's plains came alive with tension. The settlers hid behind barricades, hearts pounding, weapons ready. The wind carried strange, alien sounds, the screeth, moving silently across the land. Marisol's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her rifle, but she reminded herself that she had learned to endure hardship, to survive, and to fight. When the first wave of screeth attackers came into view, glowing eyes piercing the darkness, Marisol felt a surge of adrenaline. The battle was chaotic, loud, and terrifying. The screeth's weapons fired beams of energy, scorching the ground and sending settlers diving for cover. Yet the humans of Red Haven, trained by necessity and hardened by the planet's harshness, fought with determination and ingenuity. They used traps, redirected the attacker's path, and coordinated their movements with skill that surprised even Marisol. She found herself moving instinctively, dodging attacks, firing with precision, and helping to guide others to safety. The fear was still there, but it was tempered by focus and determination. Each successful move, each life saved, reinforced a lesson she had been learning since her arrival. Humans were capable of more than anyone could predict. Hours passed in a blur of chaos and adrenaline. By dawn, the screeth were gone, retreating with losses they could not easily replace. The settlers, exhausted but alive, gathered around the fire. Marisol's clothes were torn, her hands scraped, and her body bruised, but she was smiling. For the first time in her life, she felt truly accomplished. Jerk approached her, a rare smile on his face. "Not bad for a highborn stranger," he said. "You held your own." Marisol laughed, a sound mingling relief, pride, and disbelief. I think I understand now," she said softly. "I understand what you meant about life here, about being human. It's different, but I feel alive." "You're learning," Jerk said simply. "That's all anyone can do." As the suns rose, painting the plains in gold and red, Marisol realized that she had changed. She was no longer the timid, fragile woman who had boarded the shuttle to Red Haven. She was stronger, braver, and more capable than she had ever imagined. And in this raw, wild world, she had found a purpose beyond the expectations and judgments of her family or her society. Yet deep inside, a new awareness began to grow. The battle with the screeth was just the beginning. Red Haven was dangerous, the universe beyond it even more so. And while she had survived, she knew that survival alone was not enough. She would need to continue learning, growing, and adapting, if she hoped not just to endure, but to thrive. Marisol stood on the ridge above the homestead, looking out at the plains stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and for the first time, she smiled without hesitation. She was no longer a joke. She was part of something bigger, something raw and unpolished, yet full of life and possibility. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the frontier had only just begun to teach her its lessons. Because on Red Haven, every challenge, every danger, and every choice would shape her into someone far stronger than the elite could ever imagine. And in the distance, The plain stretched on, wild and untamed, waiting for her next step. The nights on Red Haven had grown longer and quieter after the attack of the Screth. Maricel Vera sat by the fire, her eyes fixed on the flickering flames, but her mind refused to settle. Even after surviving her first real battle, she felt a new kind of uncertainty growing inside her. The frontier had tested her strength, her endurance, and her courage, but the universe still had mysteries that no human had fully explained. For days she had noticed subtle changes in her body. Her energy levels, once drained after even light labor, seemed renewed. Her appetite had shifted, cravings came and went, and a warmth in her chest made her pause more than once. At first, she dismissed it. She had no reason to think anything had changed. She was simply living, surviving, thriving. But the small voice in the back of her mind kept whispering, "Something is different." Jerk Thorne, as always, noticed things she tried to hide. One morning, as she fetched water from the nearby river, he leaned casually against a boulder. "You've been moving differently," he said. "Quieter, more careful. Your balance is sharper, your reflexes better. It's unusual." Maricel frowned, unsure whether to be offended or grateful. I don't know what you mean." Jerk smiled faintly, not unkindly. "Humans adapt faster than you think. You're learning more than just skills, you're changing." Maricel swallowed hard. She didn't know how to explain the strange sense of possibility that had settled in her chest. It was as if the planet itself, with its harsh winds, endless red plains, and unyielding sun, had begun to awaken something inside her. A week later, the settlers faced a new challenge. A severe dust storm swept across Red Haven, fierce enough to tear through metal and wood alike. The sky turned an angry orange, visibility dropped to near zero, and the winds howled like feral creatures. Maricel and Jerk worked tirelessly, reinforcing structures, securing animals, and helping evacuate people to safer areas. The storm lasted for almost an entire day. Every muscle in her body ached, her hands were raw from rope burns, and her lungs burned from inhaling the dust. But when it finally passed, she stood on the ridge overlooking the settlement, breathless but exhilarated. "That was worse than the Screth," she said, smiling despite the grime covering her face. Jerk nodded. "The frontier tests you in ways nothing else can, and you survived." Maricel realized that survival had become second nature. Fear no longer controlled her actions. Every decision, every step was measured with focus, adaptability, and courage. She had become someone stronger than the girl who had left Veraspire, someone the elite could never imagine. But there were other changes happening, subtle yet undeniable. One morning, she awoke with a wave of nausea and fatigue. She had slept soundly, yet her body felt weak and strangely unbalanced. She dismissed it initially, thinking the storm, the labor, and the constant activity were to blame, yet the feeling persisted. One evening, after a long day repairing the settlement's water pumps, she confided in Jerk. "I don't understand it," she said quietly. "I feel different, exhausted in a way that doesn't make sense. Something is happening inside me, but I don't know what." Jerk's expression softened. He took her hands in his, careful and steady. "Sometimes the body surprises you," he said. "Red Haven has a way of revealing hidden strengths and hidden possibilities." Maricel didn't know whether to laugh or panic. She wanted to ask him outright if he thought what she feared was true, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she nodded, trusting him as always. A few days later, the answer came in a form that was impossible by all logic, all science, and all the calculations of her elite family. Maricel discovered she was pregnant. The realization was staggering. According to the best medical minds of Veraspire, she had been infertile. Her body had supposedly been incapable of carrying a child. Yet here she was, in the harsh frontier world, defying every expectation. She stood in the middle of the homestead, hands pressed against her belly, trying to make sense of the impossible. Joy and fear mingled inside her, a wild storm of emotions that left her breathless. Jerk appeared beside her, calm and steady, his eyes gentle. "I knew it would happen," he said simply. "Your body is stronger than anyone believed. The frontier has a way of awakening what is hidden." Maricel laughed softly, a mix of disbelief and relief. "No one will ever believe this," she said. "Not my family, not the scientists, not the court." "They don't need to," Jerk said. "This is ours, and more than that, it proves something important. Humans are capable of more than calculations can predict." For the first time, Maricel felt a true sense of pride that had nothing to do with social standing or approval. She carried life inside her, not because of privilege or status, but because of resilience, adaptability, and strength. She was human in the purest sense, and this child was a testament to that. As the weeks passed, the settlement faced new challenges. Word of the Screth's movements reached Red Haven, and Jerk began preparing defenses for another possible attack. Maricel threw herself into the work with determination, her body now carrying life yet moving with the skill and strength she had gained from months on the frontier. One afternoon, as she helped organize supplies for the settlement, a young settler approached her. "Lady Maricel," he said, hesitating, I wanted to thank you. Ever since you arrived, things have changed. You've shown us hope, that even when things seem impossible, humans can endure." Maricel blinked, taken aback. She had never imagined that her presence could have such an impact. On Spire, she had been judged, ridiculed, and underestimated. Here, on Red Haven, she was not just surviving, she was inspiring. She realized that the frontier was not just teaching her how to survive, it was teaching her how to lead, how to care, and how to find strength in herself and others. Every lesson, every challenge, every risk had made her stronger. The Screth remained a constant threat. Scouts reported movements near the outer plains, and Maricel joined Jerk in planning strategies to protect the settlement. They worked together seamlessly, their trust in each other growing with each passing day. Maricel's intellect and adaptability complemented Jerk's experience and instinct, forming a partnership that no one, not even the Screth, could easily break. One evening, as the twin suns set behind the distant mountains, Maricel felt a strange sense of peace. She sat on the ridge above the settlement, hands resting on her belly, feeling the first tiny movements of the life growing inside her. The impossible had happened, and yet it felt natural, almost inevitable. "This child," she whispered to Jerk, who stood beside her, "is a reminder that humans, we can endure, we can thrive, even when everything says we cannot." Jerk nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You've learned the greatest lesson of all," he said. "No machine, no calculation, no prophecy can tell us what humans are capable of. We surprise ourselves, and sometimes that's enough." Maricel smiled, a sense of hope filling her chest. The frontier had tested her body, her mind, and her courage. It had pushed her to the edge of fear and exhaustion, and yet here she was, stronger, wiser, and carrying proof that humans could achieve the impossible. As night fell and the stars began to glitter over the red plains, Maricel understood that her life had changed forever. She was no longer the infertile bride, the subject of whispers and mockery. She was a survivor, a fighter, and soon, a mother. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the universe had more tests in store. More dangers, more challenges, more moments that would push her to the limits. But for the first time, she felt ready. Not because of privilege, not because of training, but because of something deeper, the boundless, unpredictable strength of humanity itself. Red Haven had given her life, taught her resilience, and now, in carrying new life, it had shown her the impossible made possible. And in that moment, Maricel realized that no matter what the universe threw at her next, she would endure. She would thrive. She would rise. Because humans were meant to survive, and sometimes, to achieve what no one ever thought possible. The shuttle from Red Haven cut through the cold expanse of space, carrying Maricel back to Spire. She sat in her seat, her hands resting lightly on the small curve of her belly, feeling the life within her. Her mind wandered over the months she had spent on the frontier, the harsh red plains, the endless skies, the dust storms, and the nights filled with alien sounds. She had survived everything the universe had thrown at her, and she had grown stronger than she had ever imagined. Jerk Thorne had accompanied her to the shuttle, his rough hands brushing hers in a quiet farewell. "Remember," he said softly, "you are stronger than any of them believe. Trust yourself always." Marisel nodded, fighting back tears. She had left Red Haven as a student of life, but she returned not just as a survivor, but as a woman transformed, carrying a child that symbolized human resilience and possibility. The journey to Vera Spire was long, but Marisel used the time to reflect. She remembered the day she first arrived on Red Haven, trembling and uncertain. She had been sent as a joke, a humiliation to the far reaches of space. Her family had believed she would fail, that she would be broken by hardship, and that she would return diminished if she returned at all. Now she smiled at the thought. The joke had failed spectacularly. She had thrived. She had learned skills and lessons no palace tutor could ever teach. She had faced danger and survived. And against every expectation, she carried life inside her, a living proof that humans could defy the most rigid calculations. When the shuttle finally docked in the gleaming city of Vera Spire, Marisel's heart beat faster. The towering spires and polished streets were familiar, yet everything felt strange. She had changed, and so had the perspective through which she viewed her old home. The elite moved about their business, oblivious to the universe beyond their walls. To them, life was orderly, predictable, and controlled. To Marisel, it was neither. The reception of her return was immediate and tense. Lords and ladies whispered behind gloved hands. Her mother, Lady Carith, appeared at the top of the grand staircase, her expression a mixture of curiosity, disbelief, and thinly veiled irritation. Her father, Lord Vera, stood rigid, his eyes narrowed as he took in the changes in his daughter. Marisel's smile was calm and confident. "I am home," she said simply, her voice carrying clearly across the grand hall. "Marisel," her mother began. "Do not speak," Marisel interrupted, her tone firm but composed. "I am not the same woman who left. You sent me away as a joke, believing I would fail. Yet I have returned, not as a victim, but as someone stronger than you could have imagined." A hush fell over the assembly. Courtiers whispered to one another, eyes wide. The whispers of her infertility and the cruel joke of her marriage had followed her, but now those same whispers faltered under the weight of her confidence. "And the child?" her father asked, his voice tight, almost disbelieving. Marisel placed her hand lightly on her belly, the small curve obvious beneath her simple tunic. "Alive, thriving, proof that humans, especially those who endure, are capable of what no machine, calculation, or court decree can predict." Gasps echoed through the hall. The elite had studied her, tested her, and labeled her incapable. Yet here she stood, carrying a child that defied every expectation. The court physician stepped forward, eyes wide. "But scientifically, that is impossible. Lady Marisel, your records—" "I am aware of my records," Marisel interrupted, calmly meeting his gaze. "And yet here I am. My body is not broken, my spirit is not broken. And this child," she let her hand rest gently over her belly again, "this child is a testament to human resilience." The murmurs grew louder. Some nobles whispered in awe, others in disbelief, and a few in envy. Marisel, for the first time in her life, felt no need to justify herself. Her life had proven more than words ever could. Jerk Thorne, who had accompanied her to the palace gates, stepped forward. His presence drew immediate attention. He was the rugged cowboy from Red Haven, rough-handed, sunburned, and unpolished by the standards of the elite. Yet he stood tall, calm, and unyielding, a silent symbol of the frontier's lessons. "This woman," Jerk said, his voice carrying across the hall, survived a world your charts, calculations, and predictions said she could not. She adapted, she endured, she thrived. That is what humans do. The words resonated in a way that no courtly speech ever could. Marisol felt a deep sense of pride, not in her title or heritage, but in what she had become. She had faced death, storms, alien threats, and the impossible, and she had emerged stronger. Her mother's face turned pale, and her father's jaw tightened. The realization that their carefully calculated judgment had been wrong settled heavily on them. They had underestimated the very thing they prized most, the unpredictable, resilient power of humanity. Over the following days, Marisol's presence in Vera Spire became a source of fascination and even fear. Nobles who had once mocked her infertility now whispered anxiously about her strength, her confidence, and the child she carried. Courtiers came to see her, some with curiosity, others with subtle attempts to measure her worth against their expectations. Marisol responded to none of it with fear. She had learned a new kind of confidence, grounded in action, endurance, and resilience rather than titles or appearances. Jerk remained by her side, a constant reminder of the frontier lessons she had learned. Together, they walked through the polished halls, her belly growing with life that the elite had claimed was impossible. Marisol knew that the real challenge was not surviving Red Haven, but confronting the expectations and prejudices of her own world. One evening, as she stood on the balcony overlooking the sparkling city, Jerk spoke quietly. "They'll try to control you, to shame you, to reduce you to their expectations again. Don't let them. You've learned too much, endured too much, and proven too much to bow to their rules." Marisol nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She realized that the journey back to her home was only the beginning of a new challenge. She would not just be returning as the bride who had survived Red Haven. She would be returning as a force that the elite could not easily ignore. As weeks passed, Marisol began to make subtle changes in her life at Vera Spire. She advocated for new ideas, improvements in the care of settlers and colonists, and protections for women who had been dismissed or underestimated. Her voice carried authority because it was backed by experience, endurance, and undeniable proof of what humans could achieve. The whispers about her infertility grew quieter, replaced by awe and uncertainty. Marisol's transformation and the child she carried had shattered old prejudices. Even the scientists and scholars who had once mocked her could not deny the reality of her strength and the impossible miracle that had occurred. One afternoon, her father approached her privately. His eyes were cautious, yet there was a hint of respect. "Marisol, I see now that we were wrong. I see that you have exceeded every expectation. Your strength, your child, it is more than I ever imagined." Marisol studied him for a long moment. She felt a mixture of emotions, relief, validation, and lingering frustration at the years lost to judgment and misunderstanding. "It was never about exceeding expectations," she said finally. "It was about surviving, adapting, and proving that humans are capable of more than anyone dares to predict." Lord Vera nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "Then teach us," he said quietly. "Teach us to see what we have ignored for too long." Marisol smiled faintly. She realized that her return to Vera Spire was more than a personal victory. It was an opportunity to change minds, to challenge prejudices, and to inspire others with the power of resilience. She had learned the greatest lesson of all. Humans were not defined by calculations, status, or predictions. They were defined by endurance, adaptability, and courage. As the twin suns of Red Haven set behind her mind's eye, memories of the frontier returned. The red plains, the dust storms, the nights under alien stars, and the fierce determination that had carried her through every challenge. She placed her hand gently on her belly, feeling the life within her move. "This child," she whispered softly, "is not just mine. It is proof of what humans can endure, what humans can achieve, and what humans can become when they are tested. And in that moment, Maricel Vera knew that she had returned not as a victim of a cruel joke, but as a living testament to the boundless potential of humanity. The elite could no longer ignore her. The court could no longer dismiss her. And her family could no longer deny the truth. Maricel had returned to Vera Spire, carrying the impossible within her. She had survived the frontier, faced death, endured hardships, and now, with life growing inside her, she was ready to reshape the world she had once been trapped in. Because sometimes, survival alone was not enough. Humans, Maricel realized, were capable of changing destiny itself, and she would prove it. The halls of Vera Spire were quieter than usual that morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the polished floors and crystal chandeliers, but the usual chatter of courtiers and servants was absent. Today was different. Today, Lady Maricel Vera was not just returning as a survivor or a bride who had defied expectations. She was returning as a mother. The news of her child had spread faster than any rumor could travel. The elites whispered behind closed doors, some in awe, some in envy, others in disbelief. How could the infertile bride, the woman they had mocked and sent away as a joke, now carry life inside her? How could she challenge their understanding of biology, inheritance, and human capability all at once? Maricel herself walked through the halls with calm confidence, her hands resting gently on her growing belly. Every step was deliberate, every movement measured, but there was an undeniable grace in her stride. She had survived the harsh frontier of Red Haven, faced alien threats, endured storms that could strip flesh from bone, and now she carried proof that humans were capable of the impossible. Jerk Thorne walked beside her, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of scrutiny. His rough hands brushed hers occasionally, and the warmth of his glance reminded Maricel that she was not alone. Together, they had faced challenges that the elites of Vera Spire could only imagine, and survived. The council chamber was filled with members of the court, each wearing expressions that ranged from curiosity to skepticism. Maricel approached the center of the room, the polished floor reflecting the sun's rays. Silence fell. Every eye was on her, and for the first time in her life, Maricel realized that she was no longer beholden to their judgments. "My lords and ladies," she began, her voice steady and clear, "you have watched me, judged me, and dismissed me. You have believed me weak, incapable, and unworthy. Yet here I stand, not broken, not diminished, but alive, and carrying proof of what humans can endure and achieve." A murmur rippled through the council. Some nodded in silent acknowledgement, others whispered in disbelief. The whispers of her infertility had been replaced by awe. She continued, her hands resting lightly on her belly. "This child is not just mine. It is a testament to human resilience, to adaptability, to the courage and strength that you cannot predict, calculate, or control. We, as humans, are capable of more than we often allow ourselves to believe." Her father, Lord Vera, stepped forward. The pride and respect in his eyes were difficult to disguise, even after years of disappointment and misunderstanding. "Maricel," he said quietly, "we underestimated you, and in doing so we failed to recognize what humans, what you are capable of." Maricel met his gaze and nodded. "It is not too late to learn," she said softly. "Humans are strongest when they endure, when they adapt, and when they act with courage. Redhaven taught me that. Jerk showed me that. And this child will carry that strength forward." The court fell silent. Even the most skeptical nobles found themselves moved by her words, by the undeniable truth that she embodied. The infertile bride had returned, transformed not just in body, but in spirit. She had become a symbol of the potential hidden within humanity itself. Months passed, and the day finally came when Maricel gave birth. The delivery was attended by the most skilled physicians, yet the child was born healthy and strong, defying all previous predictions. Maricel held him in her arms, a small bundle of life that seemed to radiate promise. Jaren, she named him, a name meaning strength in the ancient tongue. As she gazed down at her son, Maricel felt an overwhelming sense of hope. This child was more than just her legacy. He was proof of everything she had learned on Red Haven. He carried within him the strength of his father's resilience and the determination of his mother's spirit. He was, in every sense, a testament to human potential. The weeks following Jaren's birth were filled with both joy and challenges. Maricel learned to balance her new role as a mother with her responsibilities in the court. She introduced changes quietly but steadily, advocating for better treatment of settlers, workers, and women who had been overlooked or dismissed. Her influence grew not through titles or commands, but through action, courage, and undeniable example. Jerk remained by her side, a constant reminder of the frontier lessons that had shaped her. Together, they taught Jaren the value of resilience, empathy, and adaptability. He grew surrounded by stories of Red Haven, of storms, of alien threats, and of the determination that had carried his mother through every challenge. From the beginning, Jaren learned that humans were capable of greatness not because of privilege, but because of their courage, ingenuity, and endurance. By the time Jaren took his first steps, the impact of Maricel's journey was already evident across Vera Spire. Nobles who had once whispered cruelly now sought her advice. Scholars and scientists came to study the impossible miracle of her pregnancy, seeking to understand the combination of human adaptability and resilience that had made it possible. The whispers of doubt had faded, replaced by recognition of the strength and unpredictability of humanity. One afternoon, Maricel stood on the balcony overlooking the city, Jaren playing at her feet. The twin suns reflected off the spires, casting long golden shadows across the polished streets. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, tempered with awareness that her journey was far from over. Humanity still had challenges ahead, unknown worlds, alien threats, and countless obstacles, but she knew that the spirit of her people was stronger than any difficulty. Jerk joined her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "He'll grow up knowing what it means to endure," he said quietly, "to thrive when the odds are against him. You've given him that gift." Maricel smiled, eyes on her son as he laughed and ran across the balcony. "And he will teach others," she said softly. "He will show them what humans are capable of. This is only the beginning." Years passed, and Jaren grew into a boy who embodied the lessons of both his parents. He was curious, courageous, and clever. He listened to stories of Red Haven and of his mother's survival, absorbing lessons about resilience, adaptation, and human ingenuity. He learned to ride, to strategize, and to face challenges with calm determination. Even the nobles of Vera Spire watched with growing admiration as he displayed traits that could not be taught through wealth or status, traits that were born of experience, endurance, and human spirit. Maricel watched him with pride, realizing that the frontier lessons she had learned were now living in the next generation. Her journey had not been for herself alone. It had been for the future, for the proof that humans were capable of greatness beyond expectation. The elite, once confident in their calculations and control, had been forced to recognize a truth they could not manipulate. Humans were unpredictable, resilient, and extraordinary. Maricel had become living proof, and Jaren was the embodiment of her legacy. One evening, as the family watched the sun set behind the horizon from the balcony, Maricel spoke softly to Jerk. "Do you ever think about how different everything would have been if I had listened to them?" Jerk shook his head. "No. Every step, every hardship, every challenge led us here. Humans survive because they endure, adapt, and act with courage. That's what you did. That's what we all did." Maricel looked down at her son, who was now reaching toward the stars. She realized that the frontier, the hardships, and even the cruelty of the elite had all been part of a larger lesson. Humanity's strength was not in perfection, control, or calculation. It was in endurance, courage, and the ability to overcome what seemed impossible. As the suns dipped below the horizon, Marisel made a quiet promise to herself and to Jaren. She would continue to teach him, guide him, and show him the strength that humans carried within. She would ensure that the lessons of Red Haven, the frontier, and her journey became part of the legacy of her people. And in the quiet of the evening, surrounded by the warmth of her family and the light of the twin suns, Marisel Vera knew that she had not just survived a cruel joke, a harsh frontier, and the impossible challenges of life. She had transformed them into a legacy that would inspire generations. Jaren laughed, chasing the small shadows cast by the setting suns, and Marisel smiled, watching the future unfold. The frontier had tested them, the universe had challenged them, and yet here they were, alive, thriving, and ready to face whatever lay ahead. Because humans, she realized once more, were not defined by limits, rules, or predictions. They were defined by courage, resilience, and the ability to achieve the impossible, and that was a legacy worth leaving.